partner because it's been a fun tournament, and then of course my opponents, congrats. We all made it to finals. That's awesome. Yeah. Starting time now. Observation 1, the resolution states the United States federal government should recognize Taiwan as a sovereign nation. This is a policy round indicated by the should in the resolution, meaning you should weigh this based on that benefits. Definition should all be contextual. First one on transparency. 1, in the status quo, China has the upper hand in the discourse about the one China policy, essentially stating that Taiwan is part of China, and China has control over Taiwan, and Taiwan isn't its own sovereign nation. And the United States currently does not really have a seat at the table. We haven't been able to take part in this discussion and really influence China or any of the powers in the discussion. 2, China refuses to recognize Taiwan as a state. 3, China is currently posturing against Taiwan and against South Korea and a whole bunch of other South China Sea countries. 4, China set up ballistic missiles across from Taiwan. And then 5, the UN nations just in the past have commonly followed the United States. The United States as a global hegemon, other countries are always super likely to follow whatever the United States does because the United States has a lot of power essentially in the has a lot of power in the global sphere. So the plan is that the United States federal government is just going to recognize Taiwan as a sovereign nation. I think that's pretty consensual as soon as possible, normal ways and means. Solvency, essentially by recognizing Taiwan as a sovereign nation, we probably will see spillover to other UN countries. As we can see just in the global sphere, when the United States does something, other countries are really likely to do it. Like when we invest in certain technologies, all the other countries end up doing it. We saw that with solar panels, renewable technologies. The United States as a huge global power, people want to be aligned with the United States. People don't want to be enemies with the United States because the United States has really huge military and pretty much has a lot of control over economics. I'll get to you at the end of my first intention.
I have a question planned.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
What happens to the U.S. One China policy?
The U.S. One China policy, U.S. One China policy goes away. There is no One China policy because they are no longer saying that it is one China. They are saying that Taiwan is a sovereign nation and China does not have control over Taiwan, essentially. The first contention is that of deterrence. Uniqueness 1, U.S.-China relations are at a place right now where China is not listening to the United States. We can see that where the United States repeatedly tells China to punish North Korea for all the things that North Korea is doing, specifically nuclear testing and stuff. And China does not do this, specifically not to the extent the United States asks them to. 2, in order to try to stop North Korea, the U.S. has tried to corner China with sanctions, just imposing sanctions on China, and this has had no solvency. So right now we're trying to solve the North Korea conflict through China because China is key to solving the North Korea conflict. North Korea relies on China a lot, and we've tried to influence China and make North Korea stop threatening nuclear war and building nuclear weapons, but it hasn't worked because these sanctions that we just do over and over and over again have no solvency. It is time to do something new. 3, the North Korea situation is heading towards war in the status quo. In the status quo, things are very fragile, and they are heading towards war. At any moment now, we could be going to war, and if we don't do something now, this situation continues, meaning we're heading towards nuclear war. We can see this in the fact that they have launched missiles over Japan, and also that they just had continuous nuclear testing, meaning that they're building up their nuclear weapons. 4, South Korea and Japan are close to proliferation, and they're heading towards proliferation, specifically because South Korea has expressed disdain that the United States isn't protecting them well enough, and Japan doesn't even have its own military, and because the North Korea situation isn't going very well right now, Japan citizens had to duck and cover because there was missiles flying over them. Japan and South Korea are both very close to proliferation, and they are heading towards proliferation. If the United States doesn't change something now, Link Plan passes by recognizing Taiwan as a sovereign nation. We reaffirm our commitment to our allies, and 2, because we're reaffirming our commitment to our allies because Taiwan is an ally of the United States, we also reassure South Korea and Japan too, with China losing power because again the United States doing this is something that China does not want, which means China is losing power. They want power over Taiwan. Because they are losing power, they are essentially backed into a corner. Sanctions haven't worked in the past, but this backs China into a corner in which they are essentially have more tension in the global sphere, and they have to give us some leeway if they want to uphold their place in the global sphere. So internal links, by reassuring South Korea and Japan, we deter proliferation, which means we have less nuclear weapons, and we have a lower probability of nuclear war. But 2, and then going on to impacts, essentially because we have cornered China, we have a seat at the table as far as the one China policy. We have a seat at the table to make sure things can go more smoothly. Right now, what is happening is there's just a lot of tension between both sides, and the United States hasn't had the ability to go in and essentially try to relieve these tensions, but now because China is backed into a corner, we have the ability to have a seat at the table and to talk about the issues, not only about the one China policy and about Taiwan, but also about issues such as the South China Sea, making more deterrence and more deterrence means less death. Moving on to our second point, that of diplomacy. Sorry, I don't have time. Uniqueness. One, Trump is an irrational actor. Trump responds to everything that happens essentially with these threats and these tweets. And he said that he wanted to unleash fire and fury. And then China responded by maintaining relations with North Korea. Uniqueness two, because there's no recognition for Taiwan as a sovereign state, we do not have diplomats or embassies in Taiwan, meaning we don't have a political, essentially no one's really dealing with Taiwan except for Trump just saying stuff about Taiwan is really angering China and just not making Taiwan happy. Uniqueness two, Trump, again, has been leading the communications with Taiwan diplomats because there aren't U.S. diplomats or embassies in that region, and then the link, so the plan would pass, and because the plan would pass, one, we'd see, because now they are a sovereign nation, now the United States can't have an embassy there and can't have diplomats there, which means two, now we're discussing the issues, and it's not just Trump dealing with this, it's these embassies and these diplomats who can go, and it's not essentially the world looking to Trump for what Trump's saying. Instead, we're looking towards actual people who are in the actual region, who know what's actually happening. And then the third link is now U.S. is directly in communication with Taiwan instead of being essentially it's not having a seat at the table. So internal links, now we have a seat at the table. The impacts of this is we see an increase in soft power. Essentially having a seat at the table as far as the debate means a decreased probability of war, decreased probability of death, because having a seat at the table is absolutely necessary to mitigating the effects of what could happen if there was a war, not only just with, again, having a seat at the table doesn't only apply to the one China policy, but also we decrease the probability of war in the South China Sea, in North Korea, because having this increase in soft power and having this presence in Taiwan and backing China into this corner means we have a seat at the table. Discussions are so much better than actually going to war, and the status quo can't solve for this because right now we don't have good enough relations. So for all these reasons, vote affirmation.
Okay. The order is one off in the case.
Will you be touching on topic case at all?
Yeah, just one of the solvency issues, or points. Standard.
I literally don't care.
Alright. The first disadvantage of China. Now, we have two specific scenarios that we're going to isolate. The first is that the first scenario is of U.S. and China. Now, currently, Chinese and U.S. relations are actually really high in the status quo. There are 2 points for this. The first one is that we recently reopened the 4 dialogue talks, which is an indication as to how we are actually going to get. We are actually going to get more people. We're opening lines of communication to actually solve these problems. The second one for this is that we recently created a new Green Deal, which is an indication of cooperation between the 2 countries that are able to solve back for a lot of this cooperation and relations between China and the U.S. are really high in the status quo. The problem with this is that China is also very nationalistic in their use of Taiwan, which is going to be especially problematic because if you understand the history between Taiwan and China, the Taiwanese government was a breakoff of the original Chinese government, and then the Chinese government during the Civil War, and then pretty much what happened was China formed a new government. So these 2 people are really hate each other, and there's a lot of nationalism between this. I think the warrant for this is very clear. If you look at the 2016 presidential election within China or within Taiwan when they elected the new president, there was a lot of nationalism, a lot of nationalistic rhetoric as to how they wanted to break away from China. So there's a lot of nationalism within these 2 countries, and China views Taiwan as especially key. Views Taiwan as especially key. They specifically stated that China and Taiwan are part of one unalienable China, which is going to be especially important. And what is going to happen when the first is that obviously if a major power such as the U.S. recognizes Taiwan as an independent country that's apart from China, and it goes back on all its previous commitments as to how Taiwan is not a sovereign country and is it only recognizes China. He's going to blame China, especially since the U.S. recognition of Taiwan has always been a very strong sticking point with China. The warrant for this specifically is that when the U.S. actually considered reopening talks with Taiwan and recognizing it as a country, China threatened to use actually a lot of backlash such as economic measures against the U.S. So in addition, there's a link supercharged here under the issue of insolvency. They say that more countries around the world are going to recognize Taiwan as a country if the U.S. recognizes it. And this is going to be especially problematic because this means that China is going to really see what more people are going to follow, which means that we need to retaliate right now within China. This is going to be problematic for a few reasons because currently in the status quo there's a lot of negotiation between the U.S. and China, and Taiwan is used as pretty much bargaining chip for the de-escalation of the South China Sea. Now, South China Sea tensions are especially high right now, which means that Taiwan is uniquely key in trying to de-escalate the South China Sea. Now, that's going to be especially problematic if we actually throw away this bargaining chip, which means that A, China gets very angry, and B, all future negotiations are going to be going away, which means that China is going to be increasing aggressions in the South China Sea, which is especially bad because there's a high chance in this calculation, specifically with Vietnam, because Vietnam is currently deploying a lot of submarines within the area, which ultimately means that there's a high chance of the submarines miscalculating, the sub-bombing, which ultimately leads to a regional escalation because because of the high chance of miscalculation within the regional actors, and also the conflict over the Spratly Senkakus and the Spratly Senkaku Islands will escalate with the Chinese aggression. So pretty much status quo solving with a lot of the negotiations. We throw away some negotiations, make them really angry, a lot of miscal, war, and then war is bad for regional economic collapse. The second impact scenario under this is that the second impact scenario under this is cross-play the argument as to how earlier China threatened economic backlash against the United States, against the United States when we actually suggested even trying to open up talks and recognizing Taiwan. That's exactly what's going to happen when we actually recognize Taiwan as a state, which ultimately means that this is going to lead to an increased trade war with the two countries, which ultimately is going to decrease the economies of both, and it's probably going to lead to an economic collapse considering that we are always each other's top trading partners. That's going to be really bad because the flow of free trade right now is so important. When we see economic collapse, that's bad because it leads to decreased quality of life, people get laid off, leads to death. The second scenario under this China backlash is Taiwan. Surprise, surprise. Currently, tensions within China and Taiwan are really high right now. I think I've already made the argument as to how the 2016 presidential election in Taiwan has shown a lot of nationalism on both sides. In addition, the warrant of Chinese nationalism towards Taiwan is specifically in 2008 when there was an arms deal where the U.S. sent a secret arms deal to Taiwan. The Chinese policymakers didn't actually react. However, after the secret deal became public and the public became very angry, became very angry, then the policymakers became very angry as well because they reacted to the nationalism within the country. This is indicative of how these two countries really hate each other, these two countries really hate each other because of the historical problems that you're not able to resolve in this round, which ultimately means that there's going to be probably a lot of backlash with this. You can cross-play the argument as to how China views Taiwan as part of an inalienable part of China, which means that the nationalism is ultimately going to lead to policymakers within China actually leading to the situation where they might actually annex Taiwan, just like how Russia was Russia annexed Crimea. The reason for this was because Russia annexed Crimea because Crimea was thinking about getting independence from the Russian area, which means that this is a similar scenario that's going to be happening under this. Ultimately, is going to be really bad because Taiwan and China's conflict is ultimately going to result in the loss of a lot of lives between Taiwan because China's military is far superior. You can cross-play the examples as to how China has a bunch of missiles pointed at Taiwan right now. It's ultimately going to be really bad. It turns out insurance because we're even getting into a war. All right, on the case. On the solvency answer, I just really want to touch on the fact that UN follows the U.S. or the rest of the world follows the U.S. That's going to supercharge the China dissat. That's going to supercharge the dissat because that means that China sees, look, the rest of the world might be abandoning us. We better do something now, and we better react fast. That ultimately means that it goes out. That ultimately means that any type of argument as to how the Chinese policymakers are rational does not function because they realize that they have to act now and they're on a strict timetable. What's this? Oh yeah. Okay. On deterrence, there is a fundamental contradiction with their second disadvantage. They say that allies are not assured of the area right now, but then they tell you in their uniqueness under the second advantage that currently the U.S. is pledging fire and fury to retaliate against North Korea. I think that's pretty indicative of how the allies are very assured right now with the U.S. rhetoric, which means that ally assurance is not an issue in the area right now. However, you can also look to the problems about I'm not actually quite sure that exactly on the link scenario because it absolutely makes no sense. They say that the allies are going to be assured if we are going to actually recognize Taiwan. However, recognizing Taiwan has never been on the agenda of any of their allies. Our allies are scared. I assume that they're saying that our allies are scared because we're not actually committing arms to them. I don't see how recognizing Taiwan as a sovereign nation is going to make any of them less fearful if we're not actually sending them any arms or increasing any of their missile defense systems. But in addition, we would also make the argument that our allies are actually not scared, specifically because we've actually sent THAAD to South Korea currently, and also the in addition on the link level, there's also a few turns on this specifically. We would make the argument that Japan and Taiwan, those tensions will actually escalate to a new level where like both countries will actually be hitting each other even more specifically because Taiwan and Japan are currently over conflict, have territorial disputes over the Senkaku Islands because there's a lot of oil in the Senkaku under the it's oil, right? Yeah, because there's a lot of oil in the Senkaku Islands, so Japan and Taiwan are ultimately going to get really mad at each other, which means that Japan is only going to escalate further because they see that the U.S. is turning towards Taiwan, which ultimately means that it turns the deterrence advantage or disadvantage. But again, I see absolutely there's no reason as to why recognizing Taiwan is going to be able to solve for any of this because we're literally just recognizing a country. There's no reason as to like how it makes people feel safer. I don't understand it's like a bad advantage. On the second one about how like we're currently not how there are no diplomats, we have no seat at the table. We have a lot of seats at the table. China, all Japan, all South Korea, we have a lot of seats at the table. Also, Trump can't actually get any diplomats approved by Congress. Have you seen it?
Wait, what was the last thing you said? Sorry. Congress something?
Yeah, Trump has gotten a quarter of our diplomats approved. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna go, so second advantage, so diplomacy first, and then deterrence, and then I'm gonna go their case in order, and then I'll hit on top of case 5 times. Yeah, sorry.
Can you repeat it?
Make sure you signpost clearly.
Yeah. So diplomacy first, so second advantage, then deterrence, then your case in order, and then I'm going to get to inherency 5 times. Basically, one of my responses will cross-apply to the UN response on solvency. Okay. Starting time now. On our second advantage of diplomacy, you're basically flowing through the entirety of this advantage. They put one response on it, which basically says that they're not going to get this passed. Sorry, we have the power of fiat, meaning we're going to get this passed. And when you recognize a nation, it's inherent that you're moving embassies to that nation. That just comes with the sovereign recognition of it. So we're going to get these individuals passed to have kind of discourse with it. Okay, so on the issue of diplomacy, I think this got a little bit muddled throughout the round, but this gives us access and solvency to our first advantage of deterrence. So I'm just going to go through and explain that really quickly. Basically, what we're saying here is that Trump is an irrational actor. You flow that through because they can see that argument. And so what we're saying is that Trump being in contact with Taiwan is a uniquely bad thing. We want our diplomats in contact with Taiwan because Taiwan is currently in contact with China. So we want our diplomats to be more in contact with China, and so that gives us more diplomatic power in the discussion of how of China and Taiwanese relations, as well as how China goes about its other relations in with the South China Sea and North Korea. Yeah.
Is Trump currently talking to Taiwan?
Yeah, actually, Trump called the president of Taiwan the other day, and China got kind of upset about it. So basically, but didn't actually do anything. Just said he was angry, but didn't actually do anything. So Trump is actually in contact with the leader of Taiwan, with the president there. So yes, he is in contact. We don't have our diplomats there. So it's uniquely key to have diplomats there because diplomats are key to soft power. They drop this, which means that you're going to be buying the fact that the United States gets more soft power in the region, which is uniquely key because right now we see a lot of hard power being displayed, but not enough soft power. And soft power is key to solving issues of hard power when we see an over militarization. So you give us access to soft power.
He says only 1/4 of them get approved.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, at least we gain some solvency. Okay, on the first disadvantage of advantage of deterrence, basically what they say is that currently South Korea and Japan are very assured because Trump says that they're going to be giving fire and fury. First of all, Trump is an irrational actor, and Japan and South Korea know that. They're not assured when they say that when Trump says that he's going to be going towards North Korea with fire and fury. If anything, that would scare me because they know that aggression towards North Korea promotes more aggression in North Korea. So that is kind of a scary thing to say. They're not being assured by current Trump relations there. Second of all, basically what they say is that that THAAD has been passed and that should be assuring people. But first of all, THAAD, the production of THAAD was the distribution of THAAD was very controversial. Building was actually being paused, and THAAD is purely defensive. It doesn't provide any offense to or any reassurance to South Korea because it's merely defensive and won't give them any sort of offense in case a preemptive strike is launched. So basically what you can see here is we still have access to our to advantages of diplomacy and deterrence because we need U.S. Ambassadors to go into Taiwan to be able to help Taiwan create better relations with China. Because we understand that this may anger China, but we're not saying it's going to push China to the brink of war or aggression. But having the United States diplomats there to help kind of ease the process is uniquely key to solving for any sort of anger that China has toward this. And it also leads to more deterrence because it grants the United States more soft power in the region, which is uniquely key. Because China is uniquely key to solving issues in China is uniquely key to solving issues in North Korea and in the South China Sea. And so the United States having another person at the table to be able to discuss and have access to soft power with China is uniquely key to solving these issues. They drop what Alden says that China is key. What we're doing currently is not good, so we need to do something different. Let's go on to their disadvantage, which has two parts of it. Okay. First of all, he says that right now relations are like good in the status quo. They are not good in the status quo. China is continuing to be aggressive in the South China Sea. They're literally listening to nothing the United States has advised them to do with North Korea. They're actually contradicting what the United States is doing. They are like still trading oil with North Korea. They're North Korea's like largest trading partner. They're not listening to any of the sanctions that the United Nations is like suggesting that they do. So we can see that relations in the SWO are not high right now. They provide two issues, but they really don't impact out these seem like two menial issues compared to South China Sea aggression against the United States and contradicting North Korea, which is a really hot topic right now. So we can see that relations are not currently high. They say that there's really a lot of nationalism in the area from breaking away with China, but they really don't impact out what this really means. And they say that China wants to retaliate as opposed to this, but we can see that China really won't be able to retaliate because China doesn't want to go to war with the United States. That is the last thing China wants to do because A, that would crash their own economy, and B, the United States would beat them in a war. So basically what they see here is that as soon as we put embassies in there, they are now one of our allies. We have a mutual defense treaty with them. That means that China aggresses into Taiwan, the United States comes to back them up. So China is not going to be wanting to promote aggression towards Taiwan. What it's going to actually force China to do is come to the diplomatic table because now the United States can come to their defense, and they don't want to go to war with the United States. So it's actually going to promote diplomacy between these two different countries because you now put the United States on the line as a bargaining chip, and you don't just have China being able to just pummel Taiwan without any sort of backup.
Also, UN backs up. They admitted that UN backs up the U.S., which means even more cornering for China.
Okay. Also, they admit the fact that the United Nations is going to back up the United States, and they say that this is going to be a really, really bad thing. But having the whole entire world say what you're doing is wrong is not going to make you want to retaliate against the entire world. China is a very rational actor. It's not going to supercharge what they're doing. If anything, it's going to put political pressure on them to better relations with Taiwan themselves because the rest of the world is recognizing them as a sovereign nation. Okay. Okay, basically what they say, moving on to the line by line, they talk about a trade war occurring and economic collapse. They talk about economic collapse and detriments on both sides. They say the United States will lose out and China will lose out. China is a very, very rational. Xi Jinping is very rational in terms of its economy, and so what we see here is that China is not going to lose the United States as its biggest trading partner, and B, they are not going to want to go to a trade war with the United States because whoever wins that trade war, it doesn't even matter. But the fact of the matter is, they are going to have economic detriments, which they cannot have right now with the amount of military spending they're having. They cannot face to suffer loss. Okay. Basically, next thing they talk about is Russia annexing China. Oh my God. Jesus. China annexing Taiwan. And we can see that there's no probability to this. At the point at which the United States military is backing up Taiwan because we're recognizing them as a sovereign nation and officially recognizing them as one of our allies, that is just so improbable. It's ridiculous. China is never going to do this. They're a rational actor. Again, they don't want to go to war with the United States because not only will they lose or will have mass casualties, but that'll also hurt them economically.
So basically on the D side, then advantage
Should we get to this one?
Alright. Is everybody ready? Alright. I'll start time now. Let's talk about a fundamental misconception that they have on our dissat that yes, China is a rational actor, but the problem is under their plan.
Hold on, let's just like restart.
Yeah, go ahead and restart. Because I have no idea what you said after getting distracted.
Okay. Alright. I'll start again. Alright. So on our first disadvantage about China, there's something that we have fundamentally miscovered, that China, yes, is a rational actor, but when you pass a plan, another factor enters into their calculus, and that is of nationalism. Now this is going to be critical because all of their arguments here about how escalation is happening now, that means that the status quo will always be able to resolve for this, and this is because in the status quo, China has no reason to go to war with the United States because it would be bad for both sides. The problem is, under the world of the plan, there is another factor that enters into the calculus, and that is of nationalism, because essentially, because we can see that in the past, right, like, we've seen that in our past examples, such as our 2016 example, such as our 2008 example, that whenever China feels threatened by the United States, because of popular pressure, this in turn pressures these policymakers into making decisions that would otherwise be considered irrational. And that's going to be really critical because that means that the status quo will always be able to resolve for this. But in the world of the plan, when you introduce something that is an irrational element for this, policymakers are no longer making these rational decisions. Another question I saw? Okay. So that means that all of these arguments about how like they wouldn't want to go to a trade war, about how they don't want to go to a conflict, all of these are ultimately irrelevant. That's something that the status quo will always be able to resolve. Now, I want you to look at how many warrants they have that would show that China would back down if the US increased pressure. And I think it's very clear that there is literally zero example that they have of how China has ever backed out in the past when the United States increased its pressure. That, in fact, if anything, that this is something that China views really critical to its national interests. Specifically, that they have conceded the fact that Xi Jinping himself considers Taiwan an unalienable part of China, which is why when the United States has its recognition and the international community in turn has its recognition, this is something that is really critical for him. And that's why in the past when we saw the 2016 election, when or after Trump was inaugurated, he was like, oh, maybe like the one China policy won't be a thing anymore. Like that made China super angry, and they started planning like multiple ways to have retaliatory tariffs, and that probably would have been in place if Trump actually gone through. But he didn't go through, which is why we still see that none of these impacts have happened, which is an indication as to how the school is able to resolve all of these impacts. Now, additionally, they also make these arguments about how this political pressure will help and that Xi Jinping is rational. And yes, we see that in the status quo, this political pressure is able to account for this. But when Xi Jinping has his basically the stability of his rule on the line, and when the popular opinion is against him, then that is going to be really critical and changes calculus completely into one that would need to necessarily make more aggressive posturing towards Taiwan and thus increasing the likelihood of war. Now, going on to some of the this whole like drop to like bargaining chip issue here. Now, this is really critical because right now, again, what Trump is planning to do is he's trying to use Taiwan as a way to get China to make concessions in the South China Sea, which is going to be really critical because if you pass their plan, then there's no longer the ability for Trump to use this as a bargaining chip, which is going to be really problematic because that means that South China Sea is ultimately going to be not resolvable. Now, finally, I'd like to extend again the 2008 arms deal, where essentially but when the policymakers themselves knew that the arms deal was happening, they didn't do anything about it. But when the public heard about it, that's when the policymakers was like, oh, US, you better stop this right now. And that's what caused all of this escalation and tensions to happen, which is an indication as to how this would only increase the likelihood of war. And especially since, well, 2008 was a long time ago, but now that China has escalated its tensions so high, we would say that this would actually provide a very good channel in which China could use these escalations. While we do say that the escalation is contained in the status quo because of the way that the calculus of the policymakers are working out. Also finally, the last on this whole annexation of Taiwan and how there's no probability of this. I think it's very clear that China considers Taiwan as a very core national interest, which is something that they really never touched on about. Which is why if they see their core national interest being taken away from them, that is probably going to be giving them a lot of a reason to want to freak out and to do more aggressive posturing and cause all of these complex scenarios to happen. On the first advantage about deterrence and how our allies are going to be more assured, I want you to extend across the very good argument that Ryan makes that how allies do not care about Taiwan, and this is something that is not on their agenda. That's really critical because that means that they gain no solvency to any of their advantage, because even if we do say, Taiwan, you're a sovereign nation now, nobody really cares because there are external issues like North Korea, which is the main factor of why our allies are currently unassured. But additionally, I think all of our disadvantage is actually going to be turning their advantage. The first reason for this is that because allies would probably view this as a very irrational move on Trump because they don't want to risk a war with China, and they do think that in a world in which the United States starts having more aggressive maneuvers towards Taiwan, then China would become more aggressive. And when China becomes more aggressive, that means that all of our allies in the region would feel even more unassured, which is why our disadvantage actually controls the internal link to any of their advantages happening, because if China gets more aggressive, their advantage would happen. But moreover, they talk about how China is critical to solving for North Korea. First, there is China has cut off coal exports in the past. There is no indication how that has changed North Korea's behavior in any way, and that's primarily because China has external factors involved. For example, they don't want North Korea collapsing because it would cause a refugee crisis on their border, so they fundamentally want to support North Korea. Because that is a far bigger issue to them than potentially gaining whatever benefits that they could from listening. But moreover, we can also see that North Korea simply doesn't listen to China, that China has condemned all of their missile launches in the past, yet that has changed none of North Korea's behavior. But even if you don't like any of that, you can look towards the fact that if our relations with China go bad, it's far more likely that China will just not try to even worsen its stance on North Korea, because now we have bad relations. They obviously will not listen to the United States more if we do have these bad relations, which is why we would say that the fact that they lack any examples of how cornering China works is very problematic for them, because it's far more probable that China will go even more rogue. Now, finally, onto the whole diplomacy argument and how we dropped some of this apparently. But I think that it's very critical for you to remember that there is pretty much no impact to what this discussion is supposed to resolve, what any of this is supposed to be doing. Now, I think that the scenario they're going here is that, they say that we can talk to Taiwan more. Now, there's really no reason for why talking to Taiwan more matters. Now, specifically, they have something about how, we can talk to regional allies and whatever. We already talk with regional allies. We already have diplomats with those regions. There's no reason why Taiwan needs to be included into this discussion, especially when Taiwan is currently having territorial disputes with these other countries, which means that there's no reason for why we gain any more diplomacy with our regional allies than we already do before. There's no articulation why Taiwan itself is critical to having these discussions. That's reaffirmed, or negate.
I'll signpost. Yeah, I mean, it's the same order, so yeah. There's an overview and a rebuttal. Okay. They have conceded the fact that China gets angry. The history lesson that comes out of my first speech as to how these two countries hate each other means that if we recognize Taiwan as a country, China hates us now. What does that mean? It means that their first advantage about allied assurance and how China is key to negotiating with the U.S. to solve this part of the issue, as how China is key to solving for the U.S. or solving for North Korea. This goes away because if China is furious at us, they will not cooperate with us to solve for North Korea. That's their only scenario. China angry at us, we don't solve for anything. Also means that their diplomacy advantage on the second one doesn't function. Because if China's angry at us, that means that they don't want to talk with us. They don't want to talk with us means that any possibility of any of that advantage triggering goes away. I think this is a critical mistake that they make. Yes, it's absolutely true. China will get mad at us because these two countries hate each other. That goes conceded. I think that's going to be really important. But that means there's only a risk of the dissat. However, I think the dissat is going to be very likely. There are two reasons as to why the dissat is very likely. I'm going to dissat now. So, the first one is how the risk calculus changes. Remember as to how the policymakers did not care about the arms deal in 2008 until the public opinion was like, no, policymakers, you can't do this. This means that with all the nationalism within China, if they find out that we have, recognized Taiwan as a nation, that means the population of China will push their policymakers to pretty much retaliate against the U.S. This means that rationality doesn't apply here, because you can see to the conceded evidence as to how China listens more to its populist, or listens to its population more than its rationality. That means that when you factor in nationalism, that means that all rationality of the Chinese government pretty much doesn't matter as much, because they will listen to the voices of their population more. Another key problem with this is that they have conceded the fact that because their solvency argument supercharges the link as to how the other countries in the world will follow suit, this makes China very, pretty much tense. If they see that they have to act now, otherwise a bunch of other countries could start pretty much looking at them and saying that Taiwan is a country, they do not have a lot of time to act now. which means that, again, they've conceded that when they're on a timetable like this where they have to immediately take action, otherwise a bunch of other countries might recognize Taiwan, which I think I've proven pretty clearly they don't want, that means that rationality, again, does not apply here. Because they're on a timetable, they have to do something quickly. Which means that all the scenarios that I talked about in my first speech and that surely extends are very, very, very probable. The scenario as to how they have drawn up plans to start taxing the U.S. and they are planning to enter a trade war. These are all very likely to happen. The current South China Sea de-escalation, because we can use Taiwan in part of a grand bargain, or as like a bargaining chip that Trump is currently using Taiwan as a bargaining chip, that also goes away. They have straight conceded, have not even touched the possibility, or have not touched the scenario in which there will be regional actors and regional escalations. Because now China has seen that they have lost major amounts of power because they have lost their control over Taiwan, which means that they will then, as I've said already, escalate within the South China Sea. That means that the scenario where there's miscalculation in the South China Sea is extremely probable because, again, there are multiple countries in there that are all sending submarines and that are all sending ships to these areas. I think it's very highly likely that if China massively increases its escalation in the South China Sea, that means that the miscal scenario of regional actors actually coming into conflict is very, very high. And that's going to ultimately outweigh any sort of small, tiny little scenario where Taiwan getting a seat at the table is somehow going to solve back for North Korea, and that's going to be all great. I think that's very. I think we have way outweigh there. So in terms of strength on the strength of link level, we have many conceded links as to how there will be a possible trade war, there will be regional escalation with the actors. I think these are all conceded, and these will all be outweighing everything. Anything else? All right. Let's go to their advantages. Again, remember the overview. They have conceded that these two countries hate each other, and China is furious when we actually recognize Taiwan as a country. This means that diplomatic relations and talks with China don't even matter because they hate each other, or they hate us now. Any chance of how China is going to save and stop North Korean aggression, that doesn't happen because cooperation between China and the U.S. are gone. Also, they have failed to properly respond to the fact that A, nobody cares about Taiwan getting to become a country, which means that that does not do anything to help allied terms. And also, B, they've conceded the fact that ultimately they don't nobody really care, or they don't prove sufficiently that the U.S. now getting an embassy in Taiwan magically resolves the fact that North Korea is sending missiles left and right. There's no link there. There's no link articulation there, which means that our probability of a link and our magnitude outweighs their probability. Just think about this logically. The U.S. gets an embassy in Taiwan. Great. What does that do? I don't really think it resolves the North Korean conflict. Then on the second, and that's the mistake. All of their arguments are limited to the North Korean conflict. Their second advantage, Trump talking to Taiwan, not happening. China being angry, probably far worse.
I'm going to be going sad deterrence. Their entire argument about China is that essentially the government does whatever the people want, right? Nationalism ends up affecting everyone, and whatever the people do, China wants to do. But they had conceded the fact that going to war would crash the economy, and that China does not want to go to war. So if the people don't want to crash their economy, and if the people don't want a war, that means that there wouldn't have any of the impacts they talk about, and there wouldn't be a war, right? Because their nationalism wants China to be strong. Obviously, the probability of these citizens deciding, oh, we all want to go to war because nationalism is so much smaller than the probability of all these citizens deciding it's a bad idea, because we've proven to you that war leads to econ collapse.
Okay. What were you going to say?
Okay, so this new articulation about how this whole that people would see far enough to see that there would be economic collapse as a potential, and see beyond the immediate historicism is a new argument and should have been brought up earlier.
We made the argument that war would lead to econ collapse and would be really detrimental for China, and it's just extending the fact that we said that China doesn't want to go to war, which is extending the fact that China as a whole does not want to go to war.
As a panel, a point under consideration.
Resuming the time now. Therefore, this entire contention is void. If we have such a tiny probability of the public not wanting to go to war, that means they have absolutely no impact. Additionally, we have a lot of defense on this point. We say that there's a low probability of war because they conceded to the fact that there's UN spillover, meaning that all of the UN countries, or at least most of the countries in the UN, end up backing up the United States. Which means we have such a tiny probability of a South China Sea freakout, and we have such a tiny probability of anything happening in North Korea inside their DISAD that you should just be considering this absolutely void. Why in the world would they want to go to war when they have conceded that China as a whole does not want to go to war? They dropped that point. We tell you China does not want to go to war. Therefore, as these nationalist people, they won't go to war because they just don't do things they don't want to do. I think that's pretty easy to understand. Next, on the point of diplomacy. Basically, they don't do much work on this at all. They say, oh, we don't need diplomats. Who cares about diplomats? And we already have diplomats. That's just not, those answers are not valid. We tell you all over the contention why diplomats are key and why having an embassy is key. Because we tell you that right now we don't have high diplomacy in the area and we don't have a seat at the table because Trump is essentially leading the discussion. And they concede this, that Trump is essentially leading the discussion. So what we need to do is we need to change that. Because do you see solvency in the status quo? Do you see that there's an agreement being reached? No, there's so much tension in the status quo, and no one has reached an agreement right now. We say that diplomats are absolutely key because diplomats uniquely give us a seat at the table, which we do not have right now. So if you're buying that we don't have a seat at the table, and if you're buying that having a seat at the table decreases the amount of tensions and gives the U.S. the ability to decrease tensions, not only in this area, but also just having diplomats and having a seat at the table in this issue, extend the links we talk about, where having the seat at the table in this issue increases our soft power, which gives us a seat at the table in other issues. So because they haven't done any work on this diplomacy issue, and they tell us that we will get diplomats, that means we are solving back for South China Sea, we're solving back for South Korea and North Korea, and we're solving back for Taiwan, because they have conceded that we increase soft power through diplomats, and then they have conceded that soft power solves back for all the issues in the round, meaning you are getting the impacts of decreasing the probability of war. The impacts of this are death. They really don't have any impacts on their China contention, but the impacts we get out of diplomacy of death because of war, of just war is a bad thing, and we also talk about how the economies are intertwined, and they say it would be bad for both economies, meaning that they have essentially conceded that war would be bad, also conceded that diplomacy decreases the probability of war, meaning you are buying that in the affirmation world we decrease the probability of war, decrease the economic detriments, and decrease the number of lives lost. Then again, going on to deterrence. Essentially, they also don't do much work on this at all. They essentially say that South Korea won't be assured at all, and the allies don't care. The allies do care because they see that we are cornering China. And they care about China because we told you that China is key to solving North Korea. So what they care about is the United States hasn't been able to control China right now. We tell you that United States-China relations aren't doing too well. We tell you that they haven't really made any change in North Korea. We see that North Korea keeps on doing these things. And essentially that's because China isn't being tough on North Korea. So what we see through this is we corner China. 30 seconds. We corner China, meaning China is cornered and then needs to solve the North Korea issue. So essentially, if we don't do this, our allies are really upset that we're not doing anything. So we need to do something to decrease the amount of proliferation. We give you the impacts of proliferation leads to increased probability of war and therefore increased probability of death. They basically said that China doesn't have an effect on North Korea. That's because they haven't been doing what we tell them to do. So we get solvency through deterrence, and also the soft power we get helps us with this deterrence. So their entire point is void, and we are winning on diplomacy and deterrence, meaning you are voting on lies because they have no impacts. Thank you.
Thanks, David.